Welcome to today's webcast, an update on finance in a digital world, sponsored by Workday and Deloitte. I'm Jess Bazzo, and I'll be your MC. Before we get started, I'll cover a few features of the console. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to view slides and polling questions during the webcast. We invite you to ask questions at any time during today's webcast in the Q&A area of your console. We've set aside some time following today's panel to address these questions. You'll also have the opportunity to earn a certificate for 1 CPE credit. To be eligible, you must respond to all 3 polling questions that we'll have throughout the webcast, as well as remain on the line for the duration of today's webcast. Afterwards, if you're eligible to receive credit, you'll be able to click on an icon to download the certificate located in the certification section. Now I'd like to introduce today's opening speaker and panel moderator, Matt Schwenderman, Principal with Deloitte Consulting, LLP. Matt leads the finance transformation practice. He has spent his career designing and delivering technology services and solutions to help companies across a variety of industries enable their financial and management reporting, consolidation, planning, budgeting, and forecasting. He also serves as an engagement leader and subject matter advisor in all areas of finance transformation to Deloitte's CFO program. I'll now turn things over to Matt to start us off. Welcome, Matt. Over to you.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you to the audience today. Appreciate everybody joining us on what is either a late morning or early afternoon on your part. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about what we like to refer to as finance in a digital world here at Deloitte. As the world is rapidly changing around us, there has significant implications on finance. And we have 3 folks who are living and breathing it, as we say, in the industry, and they're going to be our panel. But I'm going to do a few opening remarks here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the groundwork, if you will, by talking about where we see finance being in the year 2025. So what I can guarantee you from this slide is that of the predictions that we have going forward, they will not be 100% right. But what I can also tell you is what we're observing with our clients and what we're observing with the market is that these are all directionally moving in the manner that is stated, and that it is impacting each and every one of us today. The last thing that I can say is that while it's going to be a lot of fun, hold on, because it's going to be a pretty wild ride as well. The advent of huge amounts of data, a changing workforce, the speed at which decisions need to be made and need to be implemented for execution to remain competitive are tremendously challenging for us and our clients. And so with that, let me talk a little bit about what we feel the predictions are. But as you're probably aware, if you've been on these before, we have a couple poll questions for you. And before I reveal the first prediction, we're going to cover our first poll question.
Thanks so much, Matt. This is our first polling question of the day. This one says, is your organization already leveraging blockchain to streamline transaction processing? The answer options for this question are yes, no, but we are exploring how we could leverage blockchain, or we are not thinking about leveraging blockchain at this time. Please take a few moments to select your answer. For those attendees seeking credit for today, you'll need to answer all 3 polling questions. This is our first one. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to answer. And once we close this question down, we'll share the results and have Matt make a few comments before we share our first prediction here. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. And what we'll do now is go ahead and share the results. Matt, here they are. I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, I think that is pretty much what I would have expected on the yes side. A little lower than on the exploring side. If I had asked this question last year, to give you a sense of how fast things are moving, if I had asked this question last year, we would have certainly had a box on here that says, what is blockchain? And probably 75% of the folks would have answered that. Almost zero would have answered yes. and very few would have answered that they were exploring it. Blockchain is an example among many of the other disruptive technologies that are out there impacting finance of how quickly things are evolving, and the CFO organization is looking how to drive value out of them. Some of the other disruptors that that you'll see on the predictions on the next couple slides deal with cloud-based solutions, software as a service, subscription-based application consumption, the use of visualization and in-memory for both processing and representing outcomes from transactions, advanced analytics and algorithms being applied with cognitive computing, artificial intelligence, and then, of course, process automation and blockchain. And so one of our initial predictions is that by 2025, right, a large chunk of transaction processing will be in streamlined through automation, whether that's process automation, software bots, or integrated blockchain solutions. And with the fact that a large percentage of transactions will be automated, now comes this opening up of human capacity, whether it's you're repurposing headcounts out of finance to other areas, or you're looking at how do I reuse that talent, or how do I just gain general headcount efficiencies. We're expecting to see the cost of doing traditional finance transactions go down substantially, be reevaluated within an organization. With that comes the fact that finance now doubles down as a business insights and service organization. So the lines between traditional finance function and the other business functions begin to blur. And so finance, to be a value partner in the organization, must really double down, as you said here, in terms of how do I provide insights to better run the organization, to engage my customers in a way that's both cost-effective and revenue-driving. We're seeing some examples of that today, and our panelists will talk a little bit about what they're doing. But this has always been a goal of finance, but the automation of transaction processes, the introduction of in-memory data processing, and the speed at which we can move data really allows this to start to become a reality. The other reality that then comes is that now things are in real time. I was presenting this to a client last week, and I said this prediction is the no excuses prediction. So for many of you like myself who have worked in finance and accounting for a number of years, there was always a trade-off between how fast I could turn information around based on how long it took to process things, how much manual intervention I needed to make, and the code block by which I could capture data transactions limited the insights, and therefore I had to go back and do a lot of intervention, bring many multiple systems together to get to that. With the advent of disruptive technologies, larger data sets, etc., finance can go real time into looking at information as it's being processed. The other piece that comes with this is, I'm sure we all have experienced that our days, our weeks, our months, certainly our quarters and years are driven by periodic reporting. Periodic reporting is not going away, but it will be there for statutory external comparison purposes, if you will. More and more organizations will be moving to real-time continuous analysis against key performance indicators and items that can move the shareholder value within the organization, because I have the ability to run multiple models excuse me, against that. the time it used to take me to run a couple scenarios for a forecast, I can now run 1,000 in less time. And so with being able to do that, there's less of a need to compartmentalize things. The fourth prediction that we're looking at is, so I now have this data. This data is accessible and in real time. I have an organization that has pushed out to be more engaged with the business. But what I also have is I have the business also wanting to look at that information as well. And so there's a real shift to self-service that will continue to accelerate. What we're seeing is individuals go home, they interact with their personal life, they interact with data in their personal life, transactions in their personal life in a way that's very self-service oriented, that they are driving the interactions. And they come to work and they want those types of interactions and environments. And so we need to move away from finance doing everything for everyone and only allowing folks to see information when we release it, to more of a excuse me, a symbiotic and engaging culture. This brings us to fifth prediction, which is much more around the people side of the equation. Okay, so if you look at how we've organized finance organizations in the past, we drive activities into areas that can keep cost to serve low, can keep productivity high, and we drive towards standardization. None of those things will change. However, what will change with the introduction of automation, bots, blockchain, et cetera, is that companies are going to rethink offshore operations. They're also going to rethink how and where work gets done. And so no longer to get this efficiency play do I have to put all the activities in low labor cost environments, because some of those activities, if not most of those activities by 2025, will have significant automation embedded. And therefore the value add, the knowledge worker on top of that, can be very close to the automation play. This will obviously be dependent on finance applications and integrations and solutions in a finance platform that can keep up with the demands of the data, that can move the data quickly and provide access easily to the end user. We are seeing investments by the major vendors to continue to move in that direction. We believe that they will be ready, although one of my partners has joked maybe we should put a question mark at the end of this and say, will the big vendors be ready? But all of this plays into what's really more of what Gartner has coined and many folks are talking about is kind of the postmodern ERP era, where you're looking at solutions that can scale and be flexible with your needs in the organization, but also can plug and play into those things that make your business very unique and need to be very close to the customer. So rather than trying to take everything that is a source system or a transaction solution, put it under kind of one umbrella, it's really looking at how do I derive and deliver value and make those elements very flexible, scalable, and then make sure it integrates back into my core. And then the last, which is, this may not be a surprise, but in 2025, we're going to continue to see a huge proliferation of data, and that while public and private APIs are going to drive data standardization between organizations and within organizations, companies are still going to struggle to clean up a data mess. And so finance needs to be in the center of this. Being the owner of the chart of accounts is not enough anymore. You need to be part of the conversation. You don't need to own it, but you need to be part of the conversation around data, around customer, around product, around people, so that you can provide that insight value to the organization, as well as you understand the end-to-end business processes that could be automated and could be kind of moved up to a much more digital environment. Those are the 7 predictions. As we look at where we think finance is going to be, I have a quote up here, a Peter Drucker quote, is the best way to predict the future is to create it. And kind of what we mean by that is we got to start moving in that direction. And one of the things we have to realize is that to move in that direction, we have to be a talent-ready organization. There are 7 forces that we think are dramatically impacting the workforce. Technology is everywhere. If you think about the smartphone that probably most of you have sitting on your desk or in your back pocket, or with you today, that has more computing power than all the computing power NASA used to put a man on the moon. That didn't exist 10 years ago, and now we don't use it to make phone calls. We use it for pretty much everything. We talked about the tsunami of data. I touched briefly on some types of technology. So if you think about artificial intelligence, cognitive computing, robotics, the force that's coming there is it's really allowing us to think differently about how we can deliver what finance needs to deliver. But on the bottom left, you can also see what it's driving is a workforce that is very nervous about the vulnerability of their work, what they do, and how it will impact them. And organizations who are trying to figure out, if I can leverage these technologies, what does it mean to my organizational model? We talked a little bit about the operating model earlier. I think the next 2 are really interesting. The first is that we definitely have, diversity and generational change in the workforce going on like we never have before. And we need to recognize that people come to an organization from very different perspectives, but are also looking for very different things at the end of the day. And we need to understand how to provide that value and how to provide that. We talk a lot about generational change, what someone who's a millennial may want versus someone who's a Gen Xer, but also across racial, gender, ethnic diversity. There's a lot of different forces out there that need to be taken into consideration. The careers one, I think, is interesting. We're seeing that people are working longer, and may, in fact, because their lifespan is becoming longer, need to work longer. And as a result, we're getting to a point where we could have 5 generations in the workforce at the same time. So if you think about how you're starting your finance or accounting organization, and you're hiring a 20-something off campus, and at the same time you have someone who's in their early 70s sitting next to them. Very different skill sets, very different interests and expectations, but you need to bring them together into a highly functioning organization. And then the fourth is we're seeing a difference in an explosion, if you will, in contingent work, and I'm going to talk about that in 1 second here. What those forces are doing is requiring to really redefine across 3 dimensions the future of work. So what is being done? So what is that definition? You look at in blue, we have our current options for where we do work and who does it and what people do versus what bots do has been pretty well defined for a while, with us being very, quote unquote creative by letting people do remote work. In the new workforce, we need to look at, what level of automation are we going to apply to different jobs? Who in the workforce will we engage and where will they work? And it maybe is a little bit easier to understand by this continuum of talent options. Traditionally, we're very much organization-led models, full-time, part-time employees, maybe some contractors. we're starting to move further and further to the right with the engagement of freelancers, gig workers, crowd economies. We've not seen a lot of that in finance, but we are starting to see it in pockets, and we need to consider that moving forward. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move us forward to our next poll question. Jess, would you like to take over?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. This one says, our finance team has the skills and capabilities to succeed in the age of digital disruption. The answer options for this question are strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or I don't know. Just like last time, please take a few moments to select your answer. This is our second polling question of the day, and we'll leave this one up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to respond. Once we close this question down, we'll share the results. Matt, maybe you can make a quick comment, and then we will transition over to today's panel. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. And what we'll do now is go ahead and share the results. Here they are. It looks like the most popular answer, with about 54%, is agree. Matt, any comments before we move on to today's panel discussion?
Two comments. One is I'm happy to see that the group on the call today feels that they have the talent in place to be successful. Two is I would say that this is very different than the responses we've gotten in some of our surveys that we've done with CFOs and global controllers, where they're very concerned about the ability of their current team to be able to understand and apply some of these disruptors to the current market, as well as where to go to get the right talent. So I think this is great, and maybe that's a good topic that we can take up with the panel. So as we move to the panel discussion, we have three gentlemen joining us today that I think will give us some great insights into finance in a digital world and what they're dealing with and what they're seeing. And John, may I ask you to introduce yourself first?
Yep, thanks, Matt. My name is John Hugo. I'm currently the Vice President of Financial Products for Workday, but I've spent 25 plus years in accounting and financial roles, including auditing and controllership roles, all with public companies. The last 12 years before I started with Workday, I was SVP and Corporate Controller of Lifetime Fitness based in Minneapolis, and we were Workday customer number 12, so a very early adopter to the new technologies. And I'm happy to answer any questions on early adoption as well, but look forward to the panel.
Great. Eric?
Yeah, great. Eric Matheny. I'm the treasurer for the global property casualty business of Allianz, which is a company based in Germany. I'm based in Chicago, which means I travel a lot for my job being the global head of treasury. What I can tell you and talk about today is how one insurance company is looking at digitization, as we call it. We call it digital by default at Allianz, and I've really, I have a passion for using these new technologies to really improve people's lives, both internally and externally. So looking forward to talking more about that.
Excellent. And then our last panelist is Justin Markle.
Hi there, Justin Markle. I'm the CFO of Freewheel. It's a Comcast company focused on advanced advertising technology and solutions. We have a global customer base, a lot of the large programmers and media companies where we use our tools to help power their advertising solutions.
Great. And Justin, I'm going to keep you on the spot with our leadoff question here, which is, I did an introduction a little bit about what we're seeing around this new digital world for finance. And maybe you can start off by sharing personally, how is the new digital world kind of changing, your role and what you see as the role of finance today?
Sure. Well, I think digital has had a huge impact for me and my team personally. I think what I see is it really enables us to move faster, be more efficient, and really function on a global scale. It It's got to the point where it enables the removal of paper and location almost from the process at all. If you look at things like contract approvals, contract signing, other things we do on a digital basis, communication, whether it's through chat tools, we do a lot of video conferences as well. Even we have collaborative forecasting tools we're using. It's gotten to the point that it enables me to keep a global team. My team's spread across several countries, but also to make decisions and communicate on a rapid-fire basis, which has almost become table stakes for our business, and I know for a lot of other businesses and other industries.
Excellent. John or Eric, would you like to add?
Yeah, I was going to add, this is John, and Justin mentioned the word faster, and I think speed of everything. It's information and data, consolidations. You mentioned real-time, Matt, as well. Justin mentioned communication, financial reporting, investor reporting, even the audit function. I think the speed of information has made everyone's role much more efficient, and tie the speed with the change in our working tools, which used to be offices and large computers and PCs, and now we're down to laptops, iPhones, and iPads, it seems like. I was at my parents' this last weekend. They were watching TV all weekend, and they thought I was playing on my computer, but I was getting work done. So it's really funny how the whole digitalization technology has changed how all of us do our jobs in the financial roles.
Agreed. Yeah. Eric, when we were talking before, you had some great insights. We talked earlier in the in the initial remarks about finance really migrating to more of a value add role. And you had talked in our conversation last week about some of the value add stuff that you guys are doing in your group, and which was pretty impressive. Maybe you can share some of how you're taking steps to have finance be an active part in shaping the business strategy and working on that and executing that in the firm.
Yeah, I think our jobs have gotten a lot more interesting is how I would sum it up. We the biggest impact is finance people have to understand the entire business, from operations to claims for an insurance company, as well as even IT. I can't believe how much coding and how much I've learned about blockchain, and I guess that's really the interesting part is that as a finance person, you bring skills to the table that the other groups sorely need in terms of cost-benefit analysis of a new digital tool. May sound great to add a new technology, but financially it may not make much sense, or maybe there's better ways to do it. What we've done at Allianz is we've created what we call a digital factory in Munich, and we really process map the entire customer journey, as we call it. So, think about, even a simple auto claim from the beginning, onboarding all the way through to a claim, maybe paying a claim or giving feedback to the customer. What we've done with this process is at every point of contact, as we call it, we look at how the customer is interacting with us, and ironically, there's a lot of finance touch points in that whole process. And so that's led us to look at all kinds of different technologies and solutions from just even applying robotics to blockchain. So you name it, we've kind of looked at it already as part of that to improve the processes for our customers and their overall experience.
So if I can follow up on that for a second, maybe.
Go ahead.
Clearly, there's so clearly there's a number of skills that you need on that team. Did you build that in a center of excellence? Did you have different folks take ownership for different areas of insight?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In the beginning, no, and we discovered that was missing, and so we just this past month launched a new initiative. We call it XSE, which is just a way for us to cross-function across the business in terms of getting the right people on the team. And so you're absolutely right. So you needed finance people, claims people, underwriters, across the board types of people to tackle these problems, and then really go from, as I mentioned, this whole customer journey from start to finish, and to really start attacking the problems that way.
This is John.
Great. John, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say just shaping the business strategy and having finance participate in that role. It's even just creating a culture, and at Workday, I love this term, continuously modern. So we have every one of our customers is on the exact same version of Workday, and every customer takes a semi-annual update. And part of that update is constantly keeping current on these technical trends we're talking about, but not just technology, accounting guidance, revenue recognition, legal and regulatory guidance. So by delivering and having a tool that you can keep modern, I think it allows your organization to be competitive and always be as current as the technology is, and adopting that.
So in terms of kind of being always modern, John, are there between both what you see inside at Workday and maybe the clients that you meet with at Workday, are there particular capabilities and skills that you're seeing are in greater demand that the finance teams are building out and investing in more aggressively than others?
There are. I mean, I think the skill sets of finance teams are changing. I hope people can reallocate their headcounts, not eliminate headcounts, because that's not what we're about. It's becoming more efficient with the tools we have. But, at the core, I think finance folks still need to understand debits and credits and financial statements. You mentioned periodic reporting is not going away, but it could change. At Lifetime Fitness, we had a shift of ownership of technology from the financial technology that used to be in the technology team's responsibility bucket, and that shifted with Workday to the functional teams owning it. And that's a totally different skill set. It's not a need to code, but I like to use the term technologically curious is what we like to get out of our people, at least at Lifetime Fitness, and the same at Workday. I having been in accounting a long time, yes, when I was an auditor, I used 7-column work papers, but it's kind of funny now. I have a couple sons that are both accountants, and they like to kid me about how Dad used to do accounting, and now they're this new skill set. They've been trained and raised on the technologies that we're talking about. And my 21-year-old son asked me, what are we doing about robotics and artificial intelligence? And it's kind of fun to be involved with that with the next generation as well.
Excellent. So, Eric, I think one of the things that John just mentioned was robotics, right? And we hear a lot about process automation. I believe, in Allianz, you've, implemented them, some level of RPA. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, any benefits that you've seen from leveraging that, and, what kind of hurdles did you have to overcome along the way?
Yeah, so maybe I can talk about both robotics and blockchain, the things that we have done and are trying to do. And then I think the barriers I'll talk about at the end, because they're really important, certainly lessons that I've learned over the past year and a half of working at this. So, when we started this whole digitization process, we started looking at what problem are we trying to solve? And that's their job. They are nothing but robotics applications for finance. So we're doing this globally because we're a global company, and that's how our finance team is set up. just as an example, we did our first robotic towards the end of last year and took a process that normally takes about 8 hours to reconcile an account down to 5 minutes. And if you're familiar with robotics, it's a pretty interesting thing to watch in terms of the screen because it looks like the human's doing it, but it's obviously a computer program that's making it all happen. So that has led to 40 more different possible use cases internally. So we're just scratching the surface, we think, with that one. As a treasurer, I'm kind of excited to have my treasury analysts spend time, more time doing other interesting things than daily cash positioning, for example. So we're looking at all kinds of ways to take tedious tasks off their desk and have them work on more meaningful value-added types of things. Well, I was just going to cover blockchain real quick. The thing that we're doing on the insurance side is, it's a kind of a complicated insurance program where we call it captive financing, or captive fronting, I should say, insurance programs. But think of it as multiple parties involved with an insurance transaction. You have, a company that wants to self-insure themselves, so they would send a premium to us, the insurance company, and then we send it to their captive. The point of this is that you have 3 different entities that don't share a common ledger that are able to share one now. We really feel like blockchain will be able to service on 2 fronts. One, data transparency, so at any point in time, all the parties involved know where the transaction is, and 2, the speed of execution of those transfers. So we actually pioneered some cash transfers at the end of in November of last year in this model. So it can work, and we're very excited about that, and we really want to take it to the next level. And again, it's really about time savings for people involved and data transparency as well as cost savings in terms of moving money. The barriers, though, the biggest thing is just, it probably depends on the level of sophistication for your company, but just the level of education, you have to educate everywhere you go, and it just takes time to do that. So, I myself was not a blockchain expert by any means in the beginning, but as you learn, so that somehow you have to get that technical understanding across the business. And so that was my biggest hurdle, was just having to re-explain several times what we were trying to do with our blockchain and with our robotics, and you just have to build that into your timelines, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But just that has been the biggest barrier, is just a lack of education in the whole technology area.
Eric, this is John real quick. I just wanted to add to that because you mentioned education, and what I do with my role at Workday, I travel quite a bit, and I talk to CFOs and controllers and finance teams about technology, Workday specifically, obviously, but one of the biggest barriers that I do see is on the people side. And by nature, us accountants and finance folks are typically risk-averse and maybe reluctant to change. So I've seen teams struggle without leadership that advocates technology changes. And I've been in several situations where instead of taking advantage of automation to improve their processes, they try to force their existing processes into the new technologies, and they struggle with that. Versus like what you did, you're one of those 6% that said they're adopting technologies fast, and blockchain specifically. I think that's great, and I think it takes good open leadership that wants to adopt these changes as fast as they can to do that.
Yeah, John, this is Justin. I agree. I think part of it is educating people that sometimes the long way is the short way, that there are some challenges up front in terms of identifying or getting people culturally supportive of this change, but then once you get over that hump, you can see some real improvement that really helps the business accelerate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points. I think the interesting thing on the process automation versus blockchain, and to what you were just saying, Justin, sometimes the long road is the short road. Our clients find dozens of places where they're looking and say, I can use process automation here, but they can't always make a business case for each area that they could apply automation. Once they find a blockchain opportunity, such like the one you mentioned, Eric, there usually is tremendous business value and an ROI in there. So it's a little bit of, how do I dig deep to find the right answers, and, have that. But also a blockchain solution requires a lot of different parties too. So that's part of the challenge. So Justin, let me, tie into that a little bit. We talked, Eric gave some great examples of where they've adopted process automation, blockchain, some different things. Maybe you talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you've employed to be agile. You mentioned some, business use cases earlier, but maybe just as important is, how did you pick those technologies? Like, how did they rise to the top, when there are so many disruptors out there that you could have chosen from?
Sure. I think, and I don't know if other folks on the phone have done this as well, but I wanted to take an exercise where I really mapped out all the functions that my team was doing, globally, and to try and put it on one piece of paper and just take a step back and say, where is all the work being done and how much time is being spent? So I went through that, and actually that was a great education exercise where, especially in a lot of us, our role is more than just finance. There's a lot of other things were pulled in. But based on that, one of the areas that jumped out at me was just billing and billing and customer management, where we've had several acquisitions that we folded in and a lot of kind of homegrown billing processes. So we went through the process of looking to create a cloud-based platform for both managing, ingesting information, as well as putting out bills to our, we have several thousand customers globally. So we're still in the process now of full implementation, but that was one that jumped out through that exercise of an area where technology and the ability to access things remotely and automate processes related to the billing itself, the sending of bills, the monitoring of collections, we saw a huge benefit after we kind of took a step back and we're monitoring where we're spending our time.
Excellent. And in terms of the talent side of the equation, right? So, in part of Eric and John's, comments, they were talking about, the skill sets required and how do you do that. Did you find that you could develop your current employees? Did you do a series of retraining? Did you have to go out and hire and seed the team with some folks from outside?
I think it was a mix. As part of this project, I try to find the person that was closest to it and the most knowledgeable to be the point person. And I think in any team, there's varying levels of skill. I think part of it is, we were talking about it earlier, is looking just even from the recruiting, people who are intellectually curious and open to new forms of technology, because I don't think any of us can predict the tools we'll be using 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, because there's always going to be different needs and different tools that arise. But that openness and that ability to learn on the fly and adopt new ways of doing work are probably the most valuable skill to apply to this situation.
Right. I think both, Eric and Justin gave examples. You guys gave examples of where you started with some digital technologies, how to expand. John, you gave I thought a really nice overview of, what's happening in the market. I'm going to throw out there a concept, that I have and is shared by some of my partners, in that, finance has historically been a leader in pushing the adoption of technologies inside an organization. And when it comes to some of the digital disruptors out there, we've kind of been leapfrogged by marketing and some of the customer-facing functions of the organization, maybe supply chain, depending on the industry you're in. How do, first, it'd be interesting whether you feel that's, kind of a valid viewpoint as folks who are in the industry. And two is, if that is valid, how do you see finance taking some of that leadership role, significant partnership role back? And I'll have that open to you guys.
This is John. I can go first on that. So personally, I think finance could or should be an enabler of change. Can't force a CFO or a finance team to adapt to changes, but I can persuade them to think about impacts if they don't change. I think you're seeing a lot of C-level executives and board members are hearing about all these changes, and I think they're kind of pushing that down onto the management teams to adopt to that. And Matt, like you said, I think finance is a leader in that role. I think companies that do adapt sooner do have a competitive advantage with everything else being equal. And traditionally, finance teams have kind of been deemed back office, which I don't like that term, but that's what it's always been. And I think with data being more available through our financial systems at a much faster pace, we can actually be looked at as a enabler of, the top line as well, revenue, not just being an expense manager. So I think finance is getting back into it with getting back into being an enabler of change for the entire organization with the tools that we have now.
Part of the thing I've heard, or I can see why finance might not be viewed as an enabler of change, is obviously we have the numbers have to be right. Accuracy is of the utmost importance. So I think there's likely some hesitancy with change. Does that accuracy or other things related to the process, be put at risk? So I think that really just puts the onus on the team to do the legwork and the checking and the process and the QA work to make sure that the new process is as good or better than the old one. But that just because that bar is there of accuracy doesn't mean we should shy away from change.
Great. Eric, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that was just said, 100%. The only thing I might add would be my experience has been that finance has been that challenging voice to the business. There are so many ideas out there of digital ideas, as I call them, and some are good, some are not, right? And so it's really finance's job to look at, and you're never going to get a perfect cost-benefit analysis, but what you can do is what I call a high-level order of magnitude. In other words, is this idea worth pursuing or not? And we've really applied that and provided that, and that enables us to have that leadership role at the table. And I can tell you the operations people definitely appreciate that because we stop spending time chasing ideas that will never produce fruit for us. So I think that's a really good way for us to never give up those finance skills that we have.
Absolutely. So listen, I think we want to leave some time for some audience questions because we have some coming in. So why don't we move to the last polling question? Jess, why don't you take us through the last poll question, and then we'll turn it over for some audience Q&A as well.
Fantastic. Sounds great. Well, thank you all for your insights on the panel. It was a pleasure to listen to you guys talk. And as Matt just mentioned, we are having a lot of audience questions come in, so you guys can keep chatting those, and I'll pose them out to the group momentarily. But without further ado, let's go through this polling. This one says, which of the 7 forces discussed today do you anticipate will have the biggest impact on the future of the finance workforce? The answer options for this one are technology is everywhere, tsunami of data, AI, cognitive computing, or robotics, jobs vulnerable to automation, diversity or generational change, careers, the 100-year life, or explosion in contingent work. Please take a few moments to select your answer. As a reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you'll need to answer all 3 polling questions. This is our third and final one. Just like last time, I'll leave this polling question up for a few more moments to allow everyone to respond. Once we close this question down, we'll share the results and then transition over to Q&A. Please note there's a couple answer options here, so you can scroll down and then select your answer and then hit the submit button. So what we'll do now is go ahead and share the results. Let's take a look here. It looks like the most popular answer with about 33% is AI, cognitive computing, and robotics. Matt, any thoughts you want to share around these results before we get into some questions here?
Yeah, I think, I think on our end we would not say that any one of the 7 is going to drive all the change, but I think the fact that two-thirds of the group who are responding to technology forces and specific advanced technologies is driving the lion's share of the change. I think it was indicative of that the workforce that comes and the changes of the workforce are largely being enabled by those technologies now being prevalent and applicable. So I think that is, we'll see them all impact, and some will be dependents, and some will be, more greater drivers of that impact.
Excellent.
Jess, would you
Well,
turn over
so
to some audience questions?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. It's funny, this first one actually came in for you. So this one says, Matt, will we get to a point where we close the books every day, or will closing the books be a thing of the past only needed for GAAP filings?
I think it'll be more towards the latter. I think what we will have, and matter of fact, we have organizations that are pretty close where you can simulate a close every day, but if you think about some of the activities that happen in closing the books, it's solely for statutory reporting purposes. Basically a hard close. But I think what you will see is organizations driving towards soft closes, real-time views of cash flow positions, and being able to profile where I stand in terms of receivables, payables, assets on a real-time basis, but not necessarily going through the hard close activities except for quarters and year ends, at which point they have to report externally to regulators. If any of the other panelists would like to chime in, but that's our view. We don't see that there's a tremendous amount of business ROI in going through a heavy close any faster than that. But the quote-unquote real-time close will be the ability to use, analyze, and manage the business based on transactions in real time.
Yeah, this is John. Matt, I love that question because it's actually, I was thinking if there's something I would change about accounting in the future, it would be how we close the books. And I've always thought that it would be really neat if someday we could have the self-close button on our computers, and where everything happens based on dependencies. Everything we've talked about today, automation, blockchain, robotics, et cetera, are part of it, but then you almost have no or very minimal human intervention in the close process. But like you said, there are things that just by nature there's going to have to be manual intervention. But even the audit side of things, the tools that we have now are almost self-auditing. The audit trails are unbelievable, and every touch point has got a trace to it. So I think we're never going to be there to where it's truly a self-close, but I think we're doing the things that are going to make that former cumbersome close process a much smoother and quicker real-time process.
Excellent. Thanks so much to both you, Matt, and you, John, there. This next question, we had a lot of questions actually come in about blockchain. This one says, can someone give a high-level example of blockchain? And then we do have a specific question about that following up, but maybe we can start there. Maybe Matt, do you want to give us an example at a high level for this attendee?
Yeah, so I'll do high level, and Eric, you can jump in here too. But so, blockchain is, and I think the question also referred to like blockchain versus Bitcoin. So one of the things I would say is, blockchain is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an example of a blockchain. So blockchain is a distributed ledger, as Eric mentioned. Multiple parties interact and transact. It keeps all of the history together in that one data store on that one ledger, so you can trace lineage of a transaction and ownership rights on that transaction for all time. And every transaction that hits that ledger is automatically accepted as valid. There's no third-party validation that's required to happen, no reconciliation between parties that happens. Eric, what would you add to that?
That was pretty good. That's a hard thing to do, and I'd say two comments. If anyone gives you a definition of blockchain, there's no single definition of it. There's many variations of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I heard Barron's describe it best as a shared Excel spreadsheet that no one can change without the permission of everyone else. To me, that was the best way to describe it because it's exactly what it is. It's everyone's got, in my example, we had 3 different parties, so they have 3 different copies of that ledger, and no one can change any of the 3 without the approval of the others. Now, Bitcoin runs on a blockchain, but you could run any currency on a blockchain, and there are hundreds of cryptocurrencies out there that you could apply. You could make your own token if you wanted to and run it on a blockchain. And so really the beauty of a blockchain is it's almost impossible to hack into because of what I just described. So everyone has 3 copies of it. You'd have to hack into all 3 versions of it. Not to say you can't do it, but it makes it a lot harder. So I think that's and like I said, you in my examples, you have data transparency. All 3 parties can see the data, agree to it, and if you agree up front, then the transactions and settlement happens instantaneously. And so that's really the beauty of a blockchain solution.
Yeah, and then one thing I'll add to that. So blockchain technology, the database technology, can be used internally or externally. So Eric's example was a great example of an external blockchain where multiple parties from different organizations. We have other organizations that are piloting a blockchain solution. It's a global organization. Different components of the organization are on different ERP standards, which they don't intend to get on one global standard. So instead, they're piloting a blockchain for all their intercompany transactions, which means that all the intercompany accounting, that whole intercompany accounting center and time that they spend during the close goes away, because when the transactions are posted from the independent ledgers to the blockchain ledger, it automatically sees that as a valid intercompany transaction on both sides.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we maybe have time for one more question, and this last one, I think it's a big one. We could probably do our whole webcast on just this topic alone, but maybe I'll throw it in there and it'll be inspiration for next time. This one says, in your opinion, is RPA achieving the level of use and returns that were talked about and anticipated 5 years ago, or will RPA be quickly made obsolete by AI and cognitive solutions which offer better ROI?
Yeah, this is Eric. I can start. Good question. I think we're just scratching the surface, so I really don't think the returns are in yet. So you might be right that RPA is not the final solution. There'll be other technologies, but I can tell you so far we're pretty happy with the improvements that we've had so far in terms of, I gave you the one example of the just simple account reconciliation. So we think there are still significant savings, but the jury's still out, so to speak, on this one.
Maybe I'll take a quick stab as well and turn it over to Justin John. I would say it's not going to be obsolete, but the real value to it is going to come when you layer cognitive computing and machine learning on top. What I talk about when I talk to clients is that part of what being digital means is not taking any single technology and employing a single technology. It takes these disruptors, which are most relevant to finance. I'll go back, some of them again, cognitive, blockchain, RPA, cloud, in-memory, and, stitching together solutions that make best use of it. So having a process that is automated with a software bot that has machine learning on top that tells you where certain processes are driving inefficiencies or fraud or whatnot, or can recommend, and order solutions. So those are things that drive the greatest ROI. And you can't necessarily do those things without having an in-memory solution. And I don't know that I want to invest in all that on an on-prem, I'd rather purchase some of that through a subscription. So it's really how do you stitch together the technologies to get the highest rate of return. Any one of them will be of value, but there'll be most of value when you put it together in the right architecture. Justin and John, I don't know if you have any wrap-up comments.
Yeah, the only thing on RPA and technology in general, I think from an accounting financial standpoint, we're going to see the fastest change in kind of the high volume, repetitive, maybe low dollar type transactions, payable functions, supply chain, payroll possibly. Some of those more unique individual transactions like in the M&A world, et cetera, that's not ready for automation as much as those repetitive transactions. So I think the speed is going to be the next couple of years in those areas and less in the others. But it's going to be fast, like you said, a roller coaster.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no one silver bullet in this situation, that there's going to be a lot of pieces folded together, when you factor in the cloud versus prem and everything else, that it's going to be a stitched-in solution, as you mentioned, and half the pieces probably haven't even been created yet.
Excellent. Well, this is Jess just jumping in. Truly a pleasure to listen to the panel discussion today and all of the insights you guys had the opportunity to share with us. So once again, I just want to say a big thank you to you, Matt, John, Eric, and Justin, for a great session today. I know we ran out of time for all of the questions, but we'll be sure to share those with our speakers so they can follow up post-event. In addition to all our speakers, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today for an update on finance in a digital world. We hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.